And now we can start recording. Okay, so uh, a limited time for right now. So I decided why not shoot for maximum schizophrenia. So this we're going to be talking about a conlanging project I have for a story I've been working on for quite a while. This is not something that's going to appear for quite a while in the story. This is just something, a real interesting background detail that I want to develop for, art projects outside of it, to be perfectly honest. So this is for what I call the Gower chromatophoric language. Now, the Gower are a race of alien humans. By the way, all the aliens in the story is Divine Will, by the way. All the aliens in the story are human. Like, they are essentially human in the story. And I'm not going to tiptoe around the whole idea of, like, oh, yeah, like, it's kind of odd how, like, all these alien species are fundamentally human, but they're not. No, they straight up are for purposes of the story. But anyway, so the goal was that each planet should have its own intrinsic native magic system. So Earth has a comic book style superpower system. Uh, it's significantly more sophisticated than most other power systems, and I haven't gotten to flesh out the details in the story itself, but I do have all the details fleshed out, and they will be fleshed out over time. Uh, on a planet called Hecate, which is also called Second World in the story, the native magic system is effectively fantasy style magic, the kind of things you'd see in, Harry Potter and other, a lot of Brandon Sanderson novels. Uh, but it's an inbuilt power system. It's kind of like, again, how mutants have their own power that's intrinsic to them. This is why it's called pseudo magic, because it's not actually externally sourced. It's an intrinsic power system that these people can actually use. And it happens to just have similar rules to an old school, magic system. And, the same effects. Now, let's see. This system belongs to a race of people from a planet called Salacia. Now, when I say race, I mean like the entire population of the planet. These people have the ability that when they are placed in a new environment, their body can automatically adapt their respiratory system and their body to survive that particular climate. But not climate, but like that particular respiratory modality. So, for example, if they dive into the water, they, depending on the contents of the water, will manifest gills. They will manifest cutaneous breathing, like many amphibians have. Buccal breathing, which is basically being able to breathe with the inside of your mouth, like most frogs do, because most frogs don't have a diaphragm. Entrail breathing, which is the ability to breathe through your intestines, something a lot of sea turtles have the power to do. But they also have the ability, for example, if you go into the mountains, they can climb higher in the mountains because their mammalian lung system can also adapt to that of a bird, but it can also adapt backwards. So when they go into the mountains, their lungs change to that of a bird's type respiratory system with the air sacs and all that. But when they come down, it remains that way until there's an issue of poison gas, in which case they will immediately, and without, none of this is conscious, by the way. This thing is something that happens to them without them thinking about it. When you start introducing poisonous gases, their respiratory system, in order to protect them, will actually turn from the more efficient avian system to the less efficient mammalian system to help preserve their life. It's not a foolproof system. Each one of these power systems have their own intrinsic weaknesses and benefits, but that's the main crux of like what their actual magic is. But the people of Salacia have a addition to their anatomy, specifically with their dermatology. So we're talking about how their skin is actually fundamentally different than any Earth folk. I can click the right fucking button. Anyway. All right. So the Salacians have a system of skin where you have obviously the epidermis. So this is the surface of the skin right here is all those dead skin cells that form the surface and protect you. But beneath that, there's a complex layer of systems that actually allow them to talk through their skin, like a cephalopod, like squids, cuttlefish, octopi. And it's predictable in the way it's organized and this is all based off of what I could find for research real animals with these systems. So you have color cells right here. These are the erythrophores, the melanophores, the cyanophores, and the xanthophores. So red, black, blue, and yellow. And then you have let me pull up my notes here because it was a very specific description of leucophores. So anyway, so obviously the epidermis is the top layer of the skin. The chromatophore layer, this is the one that actually contains pigment cells. And the way that these work is they expand and contract rapidly to allow obviously the color changes. This is accomplished through the translocation of pigments and the reorientation of reflective plates within the chromatophores, and they can operate obviously they can operate with complex patterns, undulating chromatic displays that result in a variety of rapidly changing color schemata, activation and deactivation. So that's expansion and contraction. Typically occur within 200 to 500 milliseconds. If someone can correct me on that, because that's what I was able to get for like the fastest mode for chromatophore expansion and contraction. But I understand that I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong on this, feel free to correct me. Anyway, below that we have technically these two are separate layers, but they also bleed into each other. So we have the leucophore layer. Now, what leucophores are they're passive reflectors that scatter light of any wavelength that strikes them. They're not actually pigment-based, but they depend on structural properties to reflect ambient light, which is scattered about within cells by the arrangement of leucosomes, which contain reflectin. That detail, by the way, them containing reflectin, is actually important for another alien race that we're not going to talk about right now. But yeah, so when these all contract and these all expand, this is what causes a white coloration to occur. Hence, it's leucophore. Green here is not actually for the color green. I used green because it's a structural color. So I mean, white is too, but leucophores tend to be faster than iridophores. So anything that's not these 5 colors requires these what we call iridophores to actually produce. Pull up my notes here. So the iridophore reflects specific wavelengths of light through constructive interference using layers of guanine crystals. The activation time of iridophores is significantly significantly slower than chromatophores, often taking 1 to 2 seconds or longer to fully adjust. This is due to the biochemical pathways and physical rearrangement of their reflective structures. So deactivation or resetting to their default takes a comparable amount of time. So for the purposes of the language we were about to talk about, these are paralinguistic. Like you can convey meaning with these cells in this language, but they don't actually correspond to a word. It's like, for example, like if you hear someone clicking their tongue, they're not saying anything with words per se, they're not speaking to you, but they are still communicating information through the, use of sound. So, and then down here for magenta, I use magenta because magenta doesn't actually have a single wavelength. It's what you call a non-spectral color. You won't actually find it anywhere on the rainbow because it's produced by a effect of tricking the eye, basically. So this is for the photophore layer. This is embedded beneath the iridophore layer, forming the deepest communicative layer. Photophores are light-emitting cells, or they produce bioluminescence through chemical reactions. Example being with luciferin and luciferase. Or bacterial symbiosis. The activation is controlled neurologically and hormonally, with light production tied to chemical reaction speeds. Response time is in the range of 1 to 3 seconds, limited by the reaction rate of luciferin and luciferase. That's what it actually uses to respond. Now, below all these, we have a series of radial muscles that actually bind to each of these cell types. And that forms the subdural musculature. So this will be a network of radial and circular muscle fibers underpinning the chromatophores, iridophores, leucophores, and photophores, allowing for precise and rapid control of cell expansion, contraction, and positioning. The same subdural musculature not only facilitates chromatic changes, but also texture change as well. So if you ever seen like a cuttlefish or an octopus change the color, not just the color, but the texture of their skin, these people have access to that same anatomy that allows them to do that. This network of muscles enables 3D expressions like raised ridges or papillae to add depth and pattern. Not all that important to the way this language actually works. Like, if you think about any human language, for example, there are a range of possible sounds that you could use to speak that are just not used in any given language that you can think of. Doesn't matter whether it's it doesn't matter if it's Kosa, or if it's English, if it's Spanish or Mandarin or Cantonese, Vietnamese, Japanese. Doesn't matter if it's Uzbek, Arabic. There are only a limited number of sounds that your mouth can produce that are actually useful in speaking any of these languages. That's the same thing with sign languages. There are more possible gestural articulations that you could produce than are actually useful in speaking a sign language. And even with tactile languages, there's only so many, there's way more combinations of touch sensation that are possible than are actually ever used in any of these languages. So while this produces a very wide helps to produce a very wide possibility space, most of that space is going to be whittled down over time to create an actual lexical inventory, basically a dictionary. But this has been a thorn in my side for quite a while, and I hope to show you exactly how. And if you're watching the recording of this and you want to give me any advice for how to make some substantial progress with this, I am all ears. I have a sneaking suspicion that I have to do way more research into sign language to get this thing truly up and at 'em, but my time for research is fairly limited, and I don't really have any connections to the deaf community to actually learn my local sign language, let alone other sign languages, to get a good grasp of sign grammar. I'm trying. I am putting effort into it. It's just a pain in the ass given my schedule. Okay. So, in keeping with the superpower system of Earth and the magic system of Hecate, which are sister systems to the Salacians' environmental self-adaptation system, the system has an interplay with the neuroplasticity of the user. So obviously, if you have... This is going back to the fact that this is attached to the magic system of the Salacians. If you, for example, found that you had the ability to, psychokinetically move things at a distance, or, for example, you had the ability to, expand, your size or contract your size of the entire body, or you had the ability to elongate your limbs, kind of like Mr. Fantastic, any of these abilities, they would necessarily have an effect on the structure of your brain, because your brain is going to have to develop neural pathways to interface with this power. It does not mean that the power itself is reducible to physical phenomena, to a physical substrate. It could. It doesn't have to be that. But I'm also not gonna really touch on that per se in the story, because I like the potential of the open conversations that this can generate between people in the story itself. But yes, because of the way that this actually physically changes the body and the way that they communicate, the Salacians do have differing neural structures in their brain to account for the fact that this is this is how their body works. And it's not just in their brain. Their autonomic nervous system and their peripheral nervous system also has adaptations built into their magic system uh, for this particular facet of their powers. Um, let's see. Again, it's important to understand that the brain does not cause any of these systems, but the brain does not necessarily does have to again adapt to the presence of these powers. Let's see. And another note to touch on before we continue on the specific details of this language. So, one of the things is that, if you look at how human beings, how we communicate, whether it be through vocal, oral languages or sign languages, you will notice that we have a far more sophisticated oral and manual anatomy than our relatives do. So, if you take any of the great apes, none of the great apes could learn how to speak English, even if they had the cognitive capacity to do so. They didn't, by the way. There's a reason that the ape communications field blew up on its face. Coco never learned how to sign English. The closest thing to language any of the apes ever got to was Kanzi learning Yerkish, and there's some reason to be skeptical that that counts as real language learning in the first place. But I digress. We, even if they did have the cognitive capacity to actually have a language, they just can't move their mouth in a way that would conform to human speech. And it's the same thing with sign language. A gorilla could never actually learn American Sign Language because their hands are just not dexterous enough to do it. So they even from the get-go, even if you gave them the intelligence, they would not be able to do it because of that. And similarly speaking, I do have a little bit of leeway that I've given myself by just from the get-go defining that the Salacians, similarly, since their closest analog in this sphere would be cephalopods, have a more sophisticated chromatic system, chromatophore system than the cephalopods do. So it does give me a little bit more leeway for speculative biology and art in the future, because I do want to actually be able to get this to a point where I can actually draw people actually speaking this language, because I think it would be fascinating to actually have. So despite these neurological differences, and while it's not possible for Earthmen or Hecateans unless they inherit the system through adoption or fostering, and by the way, power systems, unless they're actually physically rooted in you, let's say beastmen, which is another kind of human being, human alien in the story, the power system can be transmitted to adopted and foster children, whether or not you intend for it in the first place. So it doesn't matter whether you want to transmit that power system or not. Power system does get transmitted through adoption and through fostering. And since this is a transformation power, this is one of the few ones where it does physically alter your body, but it has to be activated through a transformation. So it's like if you had an adopted child as a Salatian and they inherited this power, the first time they jump in the water, the body's automatically going to transform to facilitate this ability, because their entire power is based on transformation based on your environment. But other than that, if you didn't inherit the power, it's impossible to speak the GSL due to obviously not possessing the articulatory dermatology required to do so. But it is possible for Earthmen to learn to interpret the language, and that's my main thesis here, is that even if we can't speak a language, we can still learn how to interpret it, and we would still be able to make things to speak it on our behalf. So that was one of my main things, was is it possible for someone to learn a language they physically cannot speak, but they can still receive in the same modality as someone else? It's for example, if someone was born without the ability to actually physically speak, they were born mute, could they learn English? And I think the obvious thing is well, I mean, if they're not deaf, then I don't see why they couldn't, to be perfectly honest. And the same thing here. It's we would be human beings that wouldn't be able to speak this because we don't have the articulatory anatomy. But I do think that in such a case, we actually still could learn. how to actually speak this language. But that's just my thesis. I'm not entirely sure if that is like the case, but I highly think it is the case, which is why I put it in the story. It is speculative, science fantasy after all. And the reason I think this is because the Earthmen, the Hecateans, and the Stellations, they all possess the same language acquisition device. Human beings are built to be able to acquire language and use language in a way no other animal is. And again, since Hecateans and Stellations are human beings in the story, within the story, it would make sense that Hecateans and Earthmen could learn this chromatophore language even if they can't directly speak it themselves. Um, and again, the only reason I'm trying to do this is because I think that a conlang like this is actually learnable and makeable. But anyway, it's just a very uphill battle for me to make because I'm definitely dealing with things that I'm having to constantly learn to even get the basics up. But I find this fun. So let us zoom out. So by the way, this is just me experimenting with like none of these are like native words. This is just me trying to figure out how someone would say a given name from Earth or Hecate in their language. But we'll get to that later. First, let's talk about the way that this language is actually structured. So the Gar, by the way, are the people, the specific people who speak this language. So there's more than one chromatophore-based language, obviously, just like there's more than one sign language, spoken language, or even touch language. But the Gaur are the first encounter of a people who have a chromatophore-based language, and they speak what is a language isolate. So there is no related language to them in their own homeworld. So there are 5 parameters for GCL, and let me go over it. Oh, hold on. I might have to put my script away for just a bit. Okay. Stay on track, damn it. Okay. So the first one is... Oh, that didn't work. That's annoying. Hold on. Give me one moment, because that should have worked. I don't understand why that would not have worked. Okay. Copy and send, you bastard. There we go. Okay. Now let me put that back in my notes. Okay, so just like in spoken language, there's a place and manner of articulation, which we're considering. But considering this is literally spoken on the skin, what we mean by place and manner of articulation is very different than what you're doing with your mouth. So the place of articulation in oralist languages is the place is like the physical tools you're using to actually produce the sound. So for example, the k sound, like the K sound, you're taking the back of the tongue and you're touching the soft part of the roof of your mouth, which is the velum. So that's the place of articulation. The active articulator is the tongue, which is doing the movement towards, and the passive articulator is the thing being like moved towards. Same thing with, for example, the t sound in English. The t sound is you're taking the tip of the tongue and you're touching that ridge right behind the teeth, the alveolar ridge. So, if you want to make a y sound, the tongue raises but does not touch the palate, which is the hard part of the roof of the mouth. Hence why it's called a palatal approximate. So, just like we can describe how sounds are made in the mouth, and we can describe how signs are made in sign language, it should be possible to describe how these units of meaning in GCL are actually described. Now, since we're again talking about the skin, the places of articulation are going to be on the human body. That is very unfortunately, of course. that is very unfortunately blurry. So obviously we have, let's see, let me pull up the notes because I have a lot of terms here. So before we get to the anatomy part, we have to realize that, like, when we're talking about, again, consonants in a spoken language, we have to distinguish between voicing and unvoicing. Like, the difference between d and t are basically just if you put your hands in your Adam's apple, or the equivalent part of the throat if you're a woman, and your larynx, and you make a b sound, you'll notice that during the b there's vibration. You want to make a p sound, there is no vibration on the p. Same thing with s and z. Under s, there's no vibration. Under z, there is vibration. That vibration is called voicing, and it is the only difference between those sounds that I paired up. But it's more complicated when you try to extrapolate a chromatophore-based language onto a human body. So obviously, some signs in squids are on both sides of the body, so that would be symmetrical. So some signs are going to be symmetrical across the body. That would be a bilateral sign. But because we're talking about a human language and a human expression of a chromatophore-based language, we could imagine that, for example, a sign be manifested, let's say, with the antebrachium all the way to the pectoral, so this entire area, as one solid color, but not on the other side. And that would be, for example, on the right, a dexterous sign. Dexter literally means the right hand. And if you mirror this and place the same side on the other side, so it's on the left-hand side but not the right-hand side, that would be a sinister sign, because sinister means left hand. So chirality and symmetry is actually important for sign development in this particular language. But there's also the middle of the body, the medial. So, for example, it wouldn't make much sense to talk about like a medial stripe on the left but not the right hand side. It's a little bit too granular at that point. So for a lot of these, we have bilateral, dexterous, medial, and sinister forms, but they're not always possible. Like, for example, if I take both arms, let's say there's a sign that goes across both arms, but only both arms. There's no real point of talking about a medial version of the sign because it doesn't cover I think it's called the transverse, but I don't remember exactly, so don't quote me on that. But it doesn't cut through the center line. So there's no point of even talking about a medial version of the sign. On the other hand, it would make sense to talk about a bilateral, a sinister, and a dexterous, version of the sign. But on the counterpoint, if you were to talk about, for example, a sternal sign, so one that occurs right here, it might not make any sense to talk about a sinister and a dexterous side because there is no real right and left hand side that would be relevant for sign development. So it was just some observations I had in here. So regarding the terms for places and manner of articulation, I use mostly the anatomical terms. So we have corporeal for the whole body, I hate this word, cervicocranial, so this is the neck and head, cranial, the head, facial, across the face, frontal for across the forehead, pterionic, which is for the pterion, supraorbital, which would be the brow, orbital, which would be like the around the eyes, nasal for the nose, nasal bridge, the nose bridge, otic would be the ears, ear, you have some signs on the earlobe but not the ears, buccal would be like the cheeks, superior labial would be the upper lip, inferior labial, lower lip, and then you have the bilabial. The mandibular would be the jaw, cervical would be the neck, tracheal would be the throat itself, then you have the clavicle. The keel is one I got from studying squids, actually. So that would be across the acromial, which I think is, it actually had it somewhere on here. Where the fuck did it have it? Okay, yeah, the acromial is like the upper part of the arm to the shoulder. I don't know, what did I define that as? and the bicep at the same time. So that would be this region right here. Then the obviously acromial would be the acromion, brachial, bicipital, antecubital, carpal. I don't want to get in trouble with Twitch, so I'm not gonna go lower. But the antecubital is the inner part of the elbow. The antebrachial would be the forearm. Carpal is the wrist. Manual is the hand. Palmar is the palm. And again, a lot of these, obviously, medial is not a possible expression. Then you have the metacarpophalangeal, which is the articulated wrist, hand, and the digits. You have digital, and then you have one for each digit, which is pollical, indexal, digital, medial, digital, fourth digital, fifth digital. Truncal would be the entire trunk. Abdominal thoracic would be another possible articulation, which is the abdominal thoracic, space. You have the thoracic, which would be the thorax, pectoral, or mammary for the, obvious. Areolar is in here, sternal, solar plectic, abdominal pelvic, abdominal intestinal, which would obviously just, be the body. Let's see, navel, pelvic, belt linear, which, by the way, belt linear is a word I had to make for the belt, because I could very easily see like the word for belt in GCL possibly just being a line across the the belt line. Zipper lineal for same reason. Gluteal, I think we all know what that means. Inguinal, which is the groin. Crural, the legs. Femoral, which is the femur. Patellar, kneecap. Tibial, which is the tibia. Tarsal, the tarsus. Podal, foot. And digipodal, the toes. A lot of these aren't that important for this language per se, because most of it is going to occur for GCL in the same space that is useful in sign language if my mouse will work on me. So from about here in the body and across the entirety of the arms is going to be where about 95% of the signs are going to actually be. And I got that from American Sign Language, and it makes, to me, it makes obvious sense. You could make more use of the legs like further out, but like, if you're talking face to face with someone, that would just make the most sense to be where most of the signs are going to be. So this gives me a lot of liberty in sign design or signal design. Sign is probably a bad word for this. Signal is probably a better word for it. And that's a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, I have a lot of freedom. On the other hand, it's too much freedom. So this has been a bit of a pain in the ass. Okay, let's delete that. Now on to the next chart. Hopefully I don't end up making this ungodly clustered. Hold on. Not clustered, but pixelated. So now we're going to move on to the manner of articulation, which was largely developed from... Oh, it actually loaded that one, but it didn't load the other one first. Largely developed from observations of cephalopod communication. So, I did pixelate the hell out of this. Anyway. Okay, move that over there so I can read my notes. So, what I mean by manner of articulation here is like how exactly the chromatophores are articulated in order to create the signal in the first place. So obviously we have some, for example, we're not going to go through all of these patterns because there's a bunch of patterns that would make more sense to pair with place of articulation as well. But the ones we want to go for right now, or if I can find them, you know what, fuck it. You can look at the screen, you can see it yourself. As with cephalopod communication, patterns carry meaning, grammatical, syntactic, and lexical information. These are solid, sandy, model, spotted, ringed, checkered tile. I added these: checkered tiling, triangular tiling, hexagonal tiling. Because with human beings, it's not all about camouflage. There is more creative freedom you could potentially have for this, especially the way that human beings are drawn towards tiling shapes. So that was one of the things that crossed my mind. But there are certain sub-variations of these. So, for example, how do you hold these? Under solid, I have, for example, hold, which is where you produce a solid pattern and you hold that for a particular period of time. But you can also vary the timing. For example, you could do a single pulse, you could be dual pulse, you could do triple pulse, or you could rapidly pulse the sign. Obviously, it would probably be faster than that in like actual practice, but you get the point. And this is kind of similar to a trill, to be perfectly honest. And for the ringed variety, there's two different subtypes I have for ringed expressions. They have locally ringed and circumferentially ringed. So a locally ringed thing would be, for example, they are a series of rings that appear in the chromatophore patterns, but they don't wrap around a limb or a digit. They don't wrap around the body. They are rings on the surface of the body. So think of like a blue ringed octopus. Whereas circumferentially ringed would be, for example, a band that wraps a band of chromatophores that wraps around the limb or a digit, or for example, the neck or trunk. So, and when you bring these together with the different parts, like where these things can be articulated, and the fact that they can be independently articulated, this is where the grammar is eventually going to arise from. I just need to do a lot of research to actually make sure that the grammar I designed for this is actually fitting. One other thing that I have in here is, since this is not a sign language, the hands per se are not as important to the speaking of this language as they are in sign language. So, this is a chart I found of postures in cephalophore, communication. And this is where I got the idea that instead of using the hands for the gestural element of this language, we could instead use the posture of the person in question. Now, obviously, we're not going to do anything wild, like, for example, a sign that requires you to kneel. But, for example, you could, again, have a bend with differing degrees. You could have a, upright, straight position. You could, for example, articulate the arms, but not necessarily be so concerned with the hands. For example, the arms being raised out slightly in order to indicate like some information, or maybe the articulation of the hands inwards, like the crab or the devilish sign, posture here. So I'm still working on integrating posture as a grammatical element of the language. So again, anyone more experienced in conlanging, let me know what your thoughts are, because this is going to be a pain in the ass. But I do think that there's a lot of potential. I do think that there is potential for beautiful art to be made out of this if I can get this under control. So, in the sense of this particular language, the posture isn't actually involved in the word meaning. It carries grammatical information particularly. And then we have the fourth parameter, which is facial expression. Much like in sign language, facial expression is important in the GCL and in most chromatophore languages. In sign language, actually, the eyebrows pushed inwards, if I remember correctly, actually is like a punctuation marker. It's kind of like the interrogative particle in Japanese, where it indicates a question. So, like when you say nandeska, where the ka at the end of des, which is the copula, indicates that it's a question marker. Similarly, we have grammatical functions for the facial expression. Still working on this, but this is the idea. And then finally, the fifth of the my brain just stopped. Okay, the fifth of the parameters is the actual pattern of the colors, the way the colors are used. So I'm going to read from my notes. Chromemes are a basic unit of chromatophoric language representing meaningful color distinctions. It is roughly equivalent to a phoneme in oralist languages. It is important to note that the color itself isn't as important as the interaction between the colors. And that's the thing. So in other chromatophoric languages, the color actually does carry meaningful information regarding what word, quote unquote, you're trying to signal. In Gaur, this is not the case. The color repertoire of the Gar is influenced by their physiology. This distinction caused the Gar to make several color distinctions at earlier stages than many Earth cultures, such as those of the Indo-Europeans, the Sino-Tibetans, and Afro-Asiatics. The Gar consider the following colors as primary. And, hold on, we can move back out to see them here again. So, this would be black to brown, and if you have very light brown skin, this would include the word for black, by the way, because again, it's all controlled by that same uh factor, which is melanin. So the melanophore is associated with every expression of melanin, uh, what would you say, activation. So that's from very light brown to very deep black is all one color to their consideration. Blue and green are not considered the same color in GCL because again, blue and green are made in different ways, and they can feel when they're actually making these sounds. Just like you can tell a lot about how sounds are made if you pay attention to what's going on in your mouth when you make those sounds. Similarly, these people can learn a lot about how their own dermal anatomy works by paying attention to what's going on and paying mindful attention as they're producing these signals. So they are aware that green and blue are very different colors because blue is produced in a different way fundamentally than green is. So there was never a blue green collapse in their ancient history. Yellow obviously is a primary color to them. Red is a primary color, and since ancient times, these have been the primary colors. These ones right here. So because the okay, I already talked about that. Let's see. That's notes on how linguists deal with this. Let's see. Oh yeah. So for the final parameter, since the colors themselves aren't what creates the meaning, it's the color interactions. And I was able to come up. Just note, I'm actually colorblind. Uh, oh, sorry, Road. I did not see. I did not see. Uh, so for the squid language thing, I like speculative fiction, and it was just a thing that popped up. To be perfectly honest, I genuinely could not tell you because it just is a thing that happened, and I have no idea how I got here. So not a bloody clue. But yeah. So the interactions per se are clash. So where they colors visually compete with each other. Complement, where they neutralize or enhance each other. Contrast, where they the colors highlight differences in their hue and saturation. Dissonance, so this is where the colors coexist in tension and yet remain aesthetically stable. Dominance and subordination, so this is where the color hierarchy uh, commands the attention of one hue over the other. Gradient, so this is where they smoothly blend into each other. Harmony, which is where the colors share a common undertone. And finally, transparent overlay, which is where one color is layered semi-transparently over another to yield a new composite, hue. Um, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't give you more information about that, but I've always been interested in languages and animal communication, so I probably know. I'm not an expert in animal communication, but I do know at least enough to sound smarter than I actually am about things like prairie dog communication and corvid communication. And so I did know a little bit about squid communication going into this. It's just I am still a novice at all of this, but this is just where I've been going with this. Um, and so now that we have an idea of like the underlying physiology that for the chromatophore language for the Silesians, now we get to this schizophrenia right here, which you'll notice is mostly incomplete. but that's because some of this requires like timing information, and I haven't figured out how to write that down, like how to actually transcribe that yet. And then some of it just deals with elements of transcription that I just genuinely have not figured out yet. But this is not, to reiterate from earlier, this entire document is not actually about writing the native words of the Gaur down. It's actually about writing our names in their chromatophore language. So let's see. I have that written down somewhere as an explanation because it turns out when I write this stuff down beforehand, I usually comes out better. Um, okay, so oh yeah, we're on that spot. Introduction to loanword incorporation and name adaptation. The Gaur chromatophore. I can't talk right now. The Gaur chromatophoric language is primarily a visual language communicated through the manipulation of chromatophores across the body in combination with gestures, postures, facial articulation, and obviously color patterns. When incorporating loan words from a spoken language, the GCL alphabet, which is what we're working on right now, aims to featurely encode how the sounds are produced in order to reproduce the oralist names of Earthmen and Hecateans into their unique communicative modalities. Although, due to its nature as a visual language, it also incorporates loan signs from a variety of sign languages and therefore incorporates chiremes, or the indivisible units of articulation in any sign language, by simply just incorporating the loan sign wholesale into the GCL signal. Uniquely, contact with the deafblind community, the size of which was greatly increased by the long term effects of the competency crisis caused by the era of medical Lysenkoism, has led to the incorporation of haptemes, the individual units of haptics or touch in tactile languages, into GCL. Let's see. Haptemes are mostly indicated by changes in skin texture. And that is a background element in the story. I have not gotten to that part either yet, but there is a higher degree of things like synesthesia and, as a positive, but a lot of negative conditions in the story because there was a competency crisis that was massively exasperated by policies that didn't exactly help resolve the issue. And it led to an era where ideology overtook the medical field, and that led to a entire generation of damage, which is not a good thing. And this includes germline damage, so things like genetic therapies not being performed correctly and therefore causing multi-generational problems down the line because the doctor wasn't properly vetted to do his job. Okay. So, but haptemes are mostly indicated by changes in skin texture. Again, that's not really a thing in the Gaur language. It's just a thing the Gaur use to adapt touch information in touch-based languages when adapting them into the language. So, the theoretical world-building primer is that the Gaur are an Ur-monotheistic Stone Age culture who were rescued from the Drowning, which is a genocide campaign. They were rescued by the Global Strategic Self-Defense Operations in the first alien salvaging operation. It's a offshoot of the human salvaging operations that compose the background of the GSSDO's origin. So, the world building of their culture is minimally important here, but if you want to know anything about it, it was largely informed by the works of Andrew Lang and his successors, as well as the monotypic Homo hypothesis. So that's the hypothesis that Homo erectus, all the way to its descendants, all should be classified as one species. So Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Denisovans, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, Idaldu, and Homo erectus. That would be the hypothesis that they should all actually be classified as a single species. And I will admit, I do actually subscribe to both of these theories. I do think that it makes more sense that monotheism, from an anthropological and evolutionary perspective, is probably older as a practice than polytheism. And I do think that it makes more sense to consider the various species, quote unquote, more as lineages than actual full blown species. But that's, again, neither here nor there for today. In the Gaur religion, the All Father is the father of men and spirits alike. He's the creator and the sustainer, as well as a moral lawgiver. It is said that there was once a time when all the world adored the All Father, but then the vanity, greed, and wrath of the Salacians tempted them to adore evil spirits, and all of the Salacia forgets the All Father. The All Father endures his forgetfulness for a time, but eventually Salacia grows too wicked to ignore, and to punish Salacia for their adoration of evil spirits, the All Father drowns the world. But the All-Father doesn't have the heart to completely erase mankind. So the All-Father gifted the righteous, who would have drowned, the power to breathe underwater and on land so that they might survive. And as a reminder for what happened because human iniquity, the All-Father's uncompromising justice, as well as his desire for mercy, he gives the surviving Salacians he chose the power to speak through their skin. And this is the origin of the ability to use this, not to even create this language in the first place, for the Gaur. And yes, I did base this off a variation of the Great Flood myth, which is a very commonly reoccurring thing, anthropologically speaking. Down to still maintaining the rainbow motif as a promise, a sign of God, but in this case, instead of it being in the sky, it's literally etched into their bodies. So I'm not exactly being subtle about it. This is about as subtle as a brick to the face, and it's about as subtle as a brick to the face on purpose. Um, I'm not trying to be clever here. I'm being very blunt about this. The Gaur associate the right of naming, and this is the part where it justifies why this particular effort to write English names in Gaur is important. The Gaur associate the right of naming with one who has rightful authority over the one being named, such as a parent having the authority over a child or a king over his subject. As such, there developed a taboo against giving GCL names or GOL names, so that'd be Gaur oralist language, names to Earthmen or Hecateans. Though most Gaur do have Earth names for ceremonial purposes, and this is because most of the Gaur convert to Anglicanism and Catholicism due to the intimate relationship the GSSDO has, by its foundation and laws, with both the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, despite the GSSDO not actually belonging to either of these organizations. And this is reflective of how the nations like the Mi'kmaq saw their conversion to Christianity not as leaving their religion, but rather as coming to a more full understanding of their own religion. That they had been receiving, they had received an update of information about their God and his will for them, which was distinct from how the Europeans obviously understood their conversion to Christianity, which is as abandoning a demonic religion in favor of the true religion. Because the Gaur are father adorers. They only adore the father. They are an ancient monotheistic tribe. And they're not the only ones. There are ancient monotheistic tribes on Earth. And it is more common than people think. And even in many of the polytheistic cultures, there is evidence of a prime monotheistic deity. For example, there was the Lord of Arata, which is a Sumerian poem. Talks about a time when all men worshipped Enlil, and Enlil alone. There's, for example, the existence of a singular creator deity in the Kojiki, who unfolds with his creation. The Hiranyagarbha Sukta in the Rigved, Book 10, Hymn 121, talks about the God of gods, who even the gods must adore, and to whom is owed all oblation. Like, this pops up everywhere, and sometimes it's the result of just natural theology, like Aristotle in his unmoved mover, or Plato's form of the good. But oftentimes it does just seem like it's just an archaic memory of an older religion. Anyway, so breaking away from that, I find religious anthropology fascinating, but that's not what we're here for. So pardon my my sidetrack. So where the hell was I? Oh wait, yeah. So the way that the Gar work around this taboo, because they still need to talk about us in their language. So the way they get around this is they, again, come up with a way through the work of philologists of their own people and linguists on Earth and Hecatean grammarians to encode our names into their like chromatophore modality without actually renaming us. And I'll show you how this works in just a bit. But so that's the background to that. We don't really need to talk about the era of medical Lysenkoism. Let's see. Kanzik and the Empire of Rus are not too important. I don't need to talk about pseudo-linguistics right here. Although that is interesting, that's not really important here. Loan signs are not all that important right now. Okay, yeah, so we're just going to jump into the signs themselves, the signals. So this is the IPA. These are just different IPA charts. So these are what linguists use to identify and categorize what sounds are actually being made in any given spoken language. So for right now, I have most of the nasals and most of the plosives. So that's the like the p, b, t sounds. The k, g. It's like a stop that builds up pressure and then followed by a release of air. So you will start to notice a pattern as we go here. So the way that the Gaur encode they encode our names is they literally just write our names and how we write them or say them on their bodies. So pulmonic consonants, which are basically everything in English. We don't have non-pulmonic pulmonic consonants like Xhosa or Zulu does. So all of them include a sign to indicate a diaphragm. Nasals are indicated with a nose sign, so obviously the nose itself is activated. The color here is not important. It's just red is where the actual cell activation is occurring. Voicing, the thing we were talking about earlier, the difference between s and z, or t and d, and p and ba, is indicated by a dot on the larynx, because that's where your voice box is. That's where the actual voicing happens. The difference between voiceless and voiced is literally just whether that dot is present. If it's a bilabial consonant, so you're making it with both your lips, then obviously you light up both the lips. So for example, down here, pa, ba. These sounds are made with the lips, but they don't involve the nose, so we only light up the lips. But it requires the use of both the lips and the nose, so we light up both. And since they are pulmonic consonants, we light up the diaphragm. And the logic behind all of these is actually fairly simple. So we don't have these in English, but a labiodental, actually we do have these in English, I lied, my bad. The f and v sound are actually labial dentals, where you bring your bottom lip to your teeth. Sorry about that misinformation. Right? I'm out here spreading misinformation, it seems. But the labial dental, since you're bringing your bottom lip to your tooth, the active articulator is the one that's lit up here. So we light up the bottom lip. Since this is a nasal, we light up both the nose and the lip to indicate it. Or if there's no nasal, we just light up the bottom lip. So here we have the linguolabials. This is the one I was thinking of, but we don't have in English. This is where you actually touch your upper lip with your tongue. And you see that on this figure, where this dot, this little part right under the ridge, I forget what that's called, of the lip is the part that's actually activated to indicate the tongue comes out and touches here. And I forgot to put the nose on there. Damn it, I always forget something. Well, I will fix that after this, because I'm going to definitely remember that. Damn it. Okay. Interdentals, which, do we have any interdentals in English? Like if someone has a lisp in English, like eth. Actually, I don't actually put my tongue between my teeth when I do that. Sometimes people will, like, when they're making a th or a th sound, they will put their tongue between. Yeah, actually, I do that. My bad. Never mind. I lied again. They'll put their tongue between their lips. Not the lips. The tongue between their teeth, and that's an interdental consonant. So here we just literally light up a dot on both the lips to indicate the tongue comes through the teeth. Sorry, I'm hitting the part where it's scuff, but the scuff isn't the computer. The scuff is literally me. I have not figured out how to represent a dental yet. And this is going to bother me until I figure it out. Because I've gotten basically the rest of these two rows figured out. Okay. So I'm still debating whether or not I want to have a color contrast to indicate like the plosives here. So this is why I have the blue and the red here. The blue being like the buildup of pressure. And like obviously the red here representing the active and passive articulators. But I'm still working on whether or not that makes sense or if it's too overly complicated. Because obviously, even though these people would have the neural the neural build to speak this language, human beings are fundamentally lazy. You don't want to do too much work to just say, for example, if you're talking history, to say the name, Jesus or Muhammad or Miki. So there is a bit to where it's like I may be over designing this, so I might have to go back and redesign some of this. So you're gonna see that this is a work in progress right here. What's this? Yeah, to be fair, I was definitely feeling that way as I was doing research to to even get this far, Road. So here we have the alveolar consonants, and again, this is the n, the t and d sound. Here we represent the tongue coming to touch the ridge behind the teeth. So all the way to the end of this particular sign. That's what this particularly represents. It's a ideographic representation of the tongue performing its function. I should probably go down here actually. That way I don't have to deal with the wait. Okay, I didn't forget it there either. So this would be then the post-alveolar signs. I forgot. I've got to go and fix this because I forgot to put the phoneme pairs here. So, yeah. The post-alveolar, again, happens a little behind the alveolar in the mouth. So its distinction is that it does not reach to the end of the roof of the mouth, which is represented. The end of it represents the alveolar ridge. So post-alveolar, not exactly that, but it's still visually close because there's a reason why the sounds that they produce are also very visually close. Let's see. Retroflex. These are found in Indian languages. And I find these to be fun. So a retroflex is exactly what it sounds like. It's where the tongue itself actually curls back to make the sound. And if we go down here, maybe actually the color contrast will make it stand out more. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so I'm winging all this, to be perfectly honest. So here we have the representation of, again, the tongue actually curling back and then touching the roof of the mouth, and there's the retroflex. The idea was that it should, again, visually encode what exactly is going on. And I get away with this degree of, like, resolution in the face, in that it would make more sense, considering how important the face is for human communication, that this would be where the highest density of chromatophores, leucophores, iridophores, and photophores would actually be. So there would be the highest degree of resolution in this particular part of the body. The sign for a palatal, which is, again, like we were talking about the y sound, where the tongue raises but almost touches the roof of the mouth, the hard palate. A palatal consonant, like a plosive, would require it to actually touch the roof of the mouth. And so here we go. The visual representation of the tongue just raising to touch the roof of the mouth. Let's see. This is a modified thing that I haven't figured out how to deal with some of the modifications. So this would be like a velar, but further in the mouth. I haven't figured out how to deal with that, but I will eventually figure out with it. This is not used in very many languages today, so this would be more of just like a a completionist thing for me, to be perfectly honest. I get caught in the details, and sometimes I don't get a lot done because I'm over analyze things too much. So this would be the velar, like the k and the g sound, and the n. So that would be the nasal version. So the k and the g represent, again, it's not the very back of the throat, but it is past the palate. So it represents the back of the tongue touching the soft part of the roof of the mouth, the velum. And there's that sign. Let's see. We have the uvular, which is where the actual very back, obviously, because the uvula, right, is actually dealt with, where the tongue, and this is one of the reasons why I was like, maybe I should redesign the plosive, because I can't figure a design where the back contrast behind would actually make sense. I might, in this case, put the contrast down here, but I'm still working on that. So here we have the back of the tongue to the very back of the roof of the mouth with uvulas at. Now, believe it or not, there are actually sounds further back in the mouth than this, but not very many. So this one is, I believe, an epiglottal. Let me check. Yep, pharyngeal and epiglottal. I thought I deleted this. And because of the location, it's right on that joint, or that midpoint between your throat and your mouth, like the bottom of your mouth. So, I see you and me have the same problem, eh? Yeah, so the epiglottal is right here, right under the throat, but right under the jaw, but where you can still see it. And if I can, okay, maybe I shouldn't have 1,000 programs open at one time, and my Illustrator would respond correctly. And then finally, we have the glottal, which is where the larynx itself is producing the consonant. So, for example, like the H sound, or the in between it, that little where the glottis closes. That's where this would be activated. So I'm still trying to figure out how to distinguish like a voiced and an unvoiced glottal. But again, this is a very, very much work in progress. So that would explain the plosives, the plosives and the nasals in this transcription method. Man, all of this work just to say John, right? But so yeah, some of these are not filled out, mostly because I'm still working on how to get this information, like how to actually get this working within this framework. For example, I am thinking of having the fricatives be represented with the mouth, like the actual not mouth, but the oral cavity that's represented being with a sandy pattern, because sand causes friction. Approximates are actually not that hard. I just haven't been able to finish them. I get to finishing them yet because I was working on the plosives. But if you want to see examples, it is literally the signs just not connected. So, for example, this is a post-alveolar approximate where the tongue sign and the passive articulator sign just doesn't touch each other because it's an approximate. They don't actually touch each other. Same thing with the retroflex. The two signs are close, but they don't touch. Same thing with the palatal. Two signs are close. They don't actually touch each other. Let's see. And yeah, I didn't do the rest of them yet. But that's because I'm currently trying to figure out some other problems in this so far. What are these? I don't remember which ones these are. Yeah, these are taps and flaps. So a tap and a flap would be, and a trill would be one of those ones where it's like, this would be a timing based one. So I would just take the plosive, put it down here, remove the signifier for air pressure, and then just put a time signature on there to indicate that this is something that happens, rapidly. The lateral is one I actually just recently figured out how to do, and I might as well explain it right now. So for the laterals down here, you can't really do a lateral B. So let's say, for example, we were going to do laterals, by the way, are the sounds, like the L sounds, where air escapes through the sides of the mouth. Um, let's say you were going to do a lateral sound. The way that I have currently come to think about how to do this is to use a sign from our friend, the blue ringed octopus. Okay, let's turn this around. Where the idea being, I hate this thing with a passion. Okay, now. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna confess, I'm kind of retarded. So my idea is that we put a little ring signifier at the edges of the mouth to indicate restricted airflow through through the sides of the mouth. And actually, now that I'm putting it on there, that actually looks fine to me. Let me know what y'all think in chat, by the way. When we get to the vowels, there is another sign where we put dots at the side of the mouths to indicate like vowels that require you to round your lips. But the way we deal with vowels is actually fairly different than I think most people would expect. Okay. Whoa. Okay. But before we get to vowels, because vowels are a pain in the ass, by the way. Because unlike consonants, which are pretty decently clear to what you're dealing with and how to work with it, vowels are a lot like colors. There's a huge gradient in them, and it's a absolute nightmare to try to figure out how to put them onto this framework, but I think I figured out how to do it. Oh, yeah. If you wanted to see some of the like very, very early like planning this out stages, yeah, here's some here's some sketches. I was originally gonna have the entire chest be the signal for the pulmonic consonants, but I was like, no, this actually seems like this would actually be easier to make. Yeah, the syllabic ring is the thing. I was sibilant ring. Was originally going to have the ring be a sibilant, but I don't think I'm going to do that. So yeah. Oh my god. Work, damn you, work. Okay. So this actually does give us how to make some more complicated sounds. For example, the co-articulated consonants. And these are just literally consonants that are articulated at the same time. So again, we have nasals and plosives, so the ones I've mostly worked on right now. And you can see which consonants are being combined in these charts. And if you learn how to read the ones atop, you can figure out what these are, even if you don't know what these sounds are. And that is by design. So these are not so necessarily common, but would names like Lily be said in this way? Or since like it's a flower, would it have its own color gradients? Or since it's a human word, or would they have to spell it out everywhere? So it's not the words per se. So the way that the Gaur, because the Gaur come from basically a new Stone Age society. Think about like the late Neanderthals, and the the newly established queen of the Gaur, who studied on who in the story will end up studying under the queen of Kanzuk and the bishop of Rome, uh, is worried that the sheer influx of information is going to overwhelm the Gar people and their language, and it's going to completely destroy the core of their language. So the idea is that they actually take a Chinese approach to talking about things. And the Chinese approach to translation is names follow after their bearers, things follow after China. So in this case, it would be names follow after their bearers, but things follow after the Gaur. So the Gaur in their language, they actually come up with words to translate ideas, things like places, names, not names, places, groups, ideas, religions. I have definitely made way more progress on that when they're spoken language than their current, chromatophore language. But it's when you're talking to people. It's since they can't name people for the reason of, again, it's taboo in their culture to name someone you don't have authority over. That's where this is coming in for. This so this is just to, for example, say lily as a name. But if you're talking lily as a flower, the idea is that they will develop their own word for the flower, but because you're a person and you are a child of the All-Father, and therefore their brother or sister, they don't have authority to name you. And so they're going to use your name as it appears in your language, just adapted into their modality. So it's literally just a politeness thing, to be perfectly honest. So this would only have, these symbols would only ever be found literally when talking about like someone by name. Oh, and just for fun, I did mention I'm not going to really go into this, but I did actually figure out how to make the sound for like that sperm whales use. Because if you know anything about sperm whale communication, they actually use a pair of lips called phonic lips inside their melon that face backwards. They create a pop sound, which then bounces off the like a flat board on their skull and outwards. But it's the only sound they can make. So that sound would be represented by the forehead and the lips because they're using lips to bounce a sound off their forehead. So I just thought that was a fun little detail to put in there. So I'm currently working on click consonants and ejectives and implosives. I don't have much for the clicks yet, but for the implosives, and I have to do a little bit of research in here because I'm not entirely sure whether or not implosives are actually pulmonic or not. Because I actually have a sign for pulling air in while making a sound, kind of like how apes do. A lot of ape sounds are actually made breathing in, not breathing out. And that would be you flip the diaphragm sign upside down and then you color it black. There is some color symbolism in how, again, you write names in this thing. Black would be receptive and any other color is projective. So, but yeah, so if it turns out that implosives actually are non-pulmonic, I'll just delete the diaphragm signs. But the rest of this should hold anyway, because implosives involve pulling air into the oral cavity. And in this case, we have the unvoiced, the voiced version. The bilabial implosive. You have the alveolar implosive. You have a retroflex implosive. You have a palatal implosive, a velar implosive, a uvular implosive, and I still need to figure out a way to deal with some of these other signs, like a clip with the lips, like a sound. Not a click. The ejectives and the clicks are the ones that are going to give me a problem because I need to figure out a way to distinguish between these two sounds because neither of them actually use the lungs. So I just get rid of the diaphragm sign. I don't know whether or not I'm talking about a click or an ejective. So that's going to take me a bit, but I will figure that out probably sooner than some of the other things I need to figure out for this language, to be perfectly honest. Okay. So there's just that. I have this currently working on, and I will probably have to redesign this chart for that. But now we get to the fun part, vowels. Because vowels are a bitch. So that's an example I have for a moment. So vowels in this are actually going to be represented by space and positioning. So in the IPA chart, it's actually not very helpful to figure out what vowels like actually are in a language. The more useful tool is actually something called a vowel triangle, and I will probably link to that when I upload this to YouTube, to be perfectly honest, because an actual phonetician will explain this way better than I will. But let's see. There are different things you could use to explain the quality of a sound. In here, we're going to use, they do correspond, obviously. Mouth length and throat length do have a relationship to format 1 and 2. But largely, vowels occur in a kind of triangle space in the mouth, with E being the furthest and highest, U being the backmost and upmost back, and then ah being the lowest. And vowels all just use your tongue. So, like when your doctor says say ah, it's because that's the lowest position your tongue is when you have your mouth open. Um, but and this is where I got to thank that phonetician per se, because he also pointed out that again, vowels and colors have this gradient quality to them. Also gives me an inbuilt color symbolism to use here. So again, this doesn't carry grammatical information, but you can still, for example, have it be a flair, a stylistic flair, for these people when they talk. So the idea here was to map this onto a human face. And that's exactly what we do here. So each one of these dots and intersections corresponds to a vowel in spoken language. From the ah in English, like say ah, to the e, oo. The way we say o in English, it's a diphthong. So we actually have two vowels treated as one. And you could see this if you like say it slowly. If you say "oh," you'll notice that like when the sound begins, your lips are unrounded, but as the sound continues, they do round, and that would be here the o at the beginning, the end of the sound right here. And so instead of using the tongue as an indicator for the vowels, I was like, why not just use a dot on the face? To be perfectly honest. There's already the spatial awareness is already going to be kind of important to learning this language in the first place. And it's important to all sign languages. So it's like, why not just adapt that to be on the face? If you know where the map corresponds to on a person's face, then a dot placed somewhere tells you the information you need to know about what vowel is being used in a name. And it takes significantly less energy than rendering the tongue, to be perfectly honest. So again, human beings being lazy. But this does beg the question: how do we deal with diphthongs, triphthongs, tetraphthongs, and the very very rare pentathong, which is when you see the thong with a number attached to it, we're talking about like how many vowels are treated in one syllable. Like a monophthong has only one vowel. Diphthong has two vowels treated as one syllable. Uh, a triphthong, three vowels is one syllable. Um, fair enough. I'm probably going to wrap this up soon, Road. So I'm glad you stuck as long as you did, man. I very much appreciate it. I do appreciate when people stay for me going maximum schizo, to be perfectly honest. But I will upload this to YouTube, so if you want to catch the end of it, it'll probably be up in a couple days. But Godspeed with whatever you're about to go do, man. Okay, let's see. So what do we got here? So I used a very complicated example, and this is a work in progress as well. The longest multi-vowel syllable apparently I could find, which was a pentaphthong, and I'm not entirely sure where the linguist who found it, but I'm not entirely sure he didn't just make shit up, to be perfectly honest. So, in the case of like these multi-vowel syllables, we use the fact that we can have lines and stripes to our advantage here. And this is by having the chromatophores trace in time the actual syllable. So, for example, since we start with oh wait, yeah, because that's actually a different vowel. So yeah, this is not the like the ah. This is a different. This is actually a different a sound. So we begin here for this sound. We move to the middle sound, the middle neutral vowel in English. Then we move to the aw, to the o, and then to the oo. And we indicate not just the passage of time as the generation occurs in time, not all at once, but in that we begin with a pinky sized dot indicating the first vowel, stretching until you get to a tapering end at the final vowel. The idea is that there's a logical progression here. But, as I said, we have dots here to indicate that this is a rounded vowel, and we have a way to deal with this. So here, this is going to be terrible if I sound it. So unrounded, unrounded. You hit here, rounded. It appears. You move up to here, where it's unrounded. Take it away. And then rounded again. Here and there. So you encode the information in time, because this entire thing is about, communicating in time. Whenever you sign and whenever you speak, that the actual thing that's being perceived doesn't persist, just in static time. It does change over time. So I will admit I don't have a way to deal with R colored vowels yet. So we should have an R coloring indicator somewhere when it hits here and only here, but I don't know how to deal with that yet. So I will be figuring that out. Okay. So let me go back to my notes, since I did all that without the notes. Oh yeah, since we were talking about this, croneme encoding. So the length, a croneme is the meaningful distinctions based on time, like long and short vowels, right? That's what these little signs right here mean. These are lengthening, geminating signs. So the length of phonemes directly corresponds to the timing related to their signaling. This is important in the transcription of names from languages such as Japanese and Latin, obviously. Like an extra short is between 30 and 70 milliseconds. Short is between 80 and 140 milliseconds. Half long is between 150 to 250 milliseconds. Long is between 280 to 400 milliseconds. And extra long is between 450 to 700 plus milliseconds. I need to double check to see if I can actually justify that being in a chromatophore based language, but that's what I got so far. Toneme encoding, which is the things for like obviously Hmong, Mandarin, Navajo, Thai, and Yoruba. Kind of a pain in the ass. I've been doing a lot of research into tone production, the physiology of tone production, and it's a bit of a nightmare transferring this into the system. But from what I can use the cricothyroid, and again, correct me if I'm wrong with this. I could use potentially the cricothyroid for pitch rise, the thyroarterinoid for pitch fall or creak, sternothyroid for larynx lowering, the suprahyoid for larynx rising, vocalis for fine pitch modulation, interarterinoid for a creaky tone, and then the laterocricoarterinoid for phonation alongside tone. But I'm not entirely sure about this. This has been an absolute nightmare, and from what I'm told, studying the physiology of tone is a nightmare as well. I don't have to get like the absolute register, for example. I don't have to be like, oh yeah, it's a perfect C, a C tone. But I do have to have the ability to encode the relationships between how the pitches actually relate to each other. Because, that's important for things like Mandarin names. I have a section for stress encoding that's under construction, a section for pitch accent encoding, which is under construction. Pitch, accent, and stress. So stress is really important in English. Pitch accent is very important for Japanese. Grapheme encoding is probably the most theoretical and kind of out there part of this whole section. So here's what I have written down. The integration of orthography into the GCL is extremely rare and almost exclusively used in the articulation of human names. In particular, the encoding of Japanese names follows a similar pattern to the JSL practice of kanji kara narumono, literally things derived from kanji characters, which involves encoding the kanji of a family name into a manual form. They just use the JSL version of the kanji that, the name is composed of. The method that the Gaur who come into frequent contact with Yamato JSL speakers adopt is similar to the manner in which JSL names can be derived, specifically through the method of Moji Kusho Hiki, characters, and Kanji no Katachi Yori, Hyogen Shita Shua no Umi Awase, which is literally combination of signs that express the shape of the kanji. The number of signs in the name of a Japanese person is equivalent to the number of characters in their name, with a 1-to-1 correspondence between sign and kanji and a syllogram, which would be the kana, with each character represented in a predictable manner via a systematic sign to character mapping, with 421 signs corresponding to kanji and yubimoji, literally finger spelling, basically, uh, accounting for names written in hiragana and katakana. Let's see. While almost never used to transcribe names, because there already exists a method of encoding the relevant phonemes and sign names, there is a manner to encode the graphemes of a language into GCL so that they can be discussed. The English alphabet is manually encoded with the British Sign Language and manual alphabet. The Japanese syllabaries hiragana and katakana are manually encoded with the Japanese Sign Language's yubimoji. Cyrillic alphabet is manually encoded with the Russian manual alphabet. The Jamo is of Korean is manually encoded with the Korean manual alphabet. In the event that the Gower discovers that the person with a polysemic or multiple meaning name in question already has a sign language name distinct from their written oralist name, it is often that the Gower will ask the person to trace their name onto the Gower's forehead with their finger so that the Gower in question can learn how to trace the Earthman's name onto their own forehead with their chromatophores. This is primarily used in East Asia Asian names, which are written with Chinese or Chinese-derived characters such as kanji, hanja, and chunam, or swan dip, where there is a high degree of homophones in the name. This high degree of homophones renders many names ambiguous, meaning that the same name could mean many different things. For example, a Japanese woman named Aiko may have her name officially documented in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways in kanji, and then another way in obviously hiragana and katakana. The two kana written names preserve ambiguity, while the kanji using names actually provide specificity of the meaning. So, the reason it's possible that the Gaur can actually trace the written word onto their skin is because it's actually a common game among Gaur children to draw patterns on each other's skin and then see if their friend can replicate the pattern. Think, for example, drawing a picture with your finger on your friend's back or on their forehead, and then seeing if they can replicate that pattern on their back or on their forehead. And then the closer you get, obviously the better you are at the game, and the game eventually evolves into tracing a pattern on one part of the body and then moving that same pattern onto another part of the body. For example, tracing something on the right arm and reflecting it to the left arm. So there actually is an inbuilt reason why they can do this. And it also, that game trains corporeal mindfulness, so it predisposes them to be able to do this in the first place. As far as hap teams go, so we're getting to like the tactile part of the language of like loan names. This is largely for names in protactile ASL and other protactile languages. Again, as I mentioned earlier, black encodes where on the body of the receiver the touch sensation is perceived and by what manner it occurs. Regarding like hap teams in tactile languages, they include things like contact types such as tap, press, rub, glide, location, directionality, in which case it'd be like towards, away, circling, zigzag. Things like force or texture, which would be firm, soft, pulsing, vibrating, or things like temporal structure, such as tap tap or glide. The Silesians, due to their sophisticated dermal anatomy, can make use of the papillae, so that's the small muscles underneath the skin that contract and relax to manipulate their three-dimensional skin texture, in order to encode information relevant to hap teams. Regarding cephalopods such as Sepia officinalis, there are 9 sets, which are 9 named papilla sets, which are most completely described. And similarly, the Gaur have a similar system. The papilla system in the Salacians is just as sophisticated as the chromatophore system, but as in cuttlefish, the type of papilla are not uniformly distributed across their human body. But this gives Salacians still access to the following skin textures to alternate between: smooth, fine pebbled or stippled, coarse knobby or spiky, ridges or keeled, flaps or lobed, and branching or multi-lobed papillae. So this is because like some octopi and cuttlefish can express simple to multiple branching papilliforms, adding complex roughness. Um, but I'm still working to develop a one-to-one correspondence system between haptemes and papilla expression in you know with the gar. So an Earth name in theory for a historical figure. So for a gar talking to you, they would probably just ask you what your name is, and then write your oralist name out. Or if they know, the more they know you, they can ask you more information about it to have a more complete name. But for historical figures, at least, it is a combination of the chromatophore expression, the sign name integration, and the haptene encoding. So, but again, this is only because of the effect the era of medical Lysenkoism had on the Earth population, which made deafness, blindness, and deafblindness significantly more common than they are today. Um, so, some world building notes on this. So, the Queen of the Gar will end up establishing the Royal Academy of the Gar chromatophoric language. Um, and the task of that is to preserve the integrity of the Gar language, which would serve under the Ministry of Education. So, and it would be the sister organization to the Royal Academy of the Gar Oralist language. Um, so yeah, I already talked a little bit about that earlier, so not really going to go into that. I do have a section for music encoding, but I don't have anything done for that yet. And for math encoding, but I don't have anything for that yet. Uh, I do have a section for orthography. So, how would you write this language? And I'm still working on getting the language up in the first place, which will involve me doing a lot of drawing. Um, but I do already have some idea of how this would probably be written down. And I would suggest if you want to get some idea of what this would probably look like written down as a written language, it would probably look somewhat like ASL Write, which is a community-driven project in the ASL community, so American Sign Language community, to develop a writing system for American Sign Language. And I'm very supportive of the project. I'm supportive of the project, and I hope them the best of luck because it's a beautiful script if you ever actually seen ASL Write. It is actually a beautifully designed language. And so now we get to the part where I finally get to close this out. But before we do that, one last thing. This is the first native word in the language that I was able to actually develop. And hopefully, this actually lets me do the thing. Ah, there we go. And it was the word for marriage. So there's a high degree of like symbolism in this particular phrase. Now, again, the posture here is not all that important because the posture doesn't define it doesn't have effect on the meaning of the word. It carries grammatical information. I just use this so that we could get an idea of what's going on here. So the entirety of so we have marriage is actually a combination of two signs. And the sign is for husband and wife. And yeah, originally I was a little skeptical on this, but I think I'm going to keep it this way. And the signal for husband is the head, the right heart, and the right arm. Wait, yeah, that would be the right arm. Whereas the wife is the left side of the heart, the throat or the neck actually, and the arm. And for the left arm, and for the arm, it's all of the hand, fingers, the forearm, the upper arm, and the shoulder on both of them. And this actually I designed this sign for its complementarian purposes, because the Gar are complementarians. They believe that man and woman have different roles to fill, and that they are most happy when they get to be man and woman for each other. So the husband is the head of the household, obviously, and but the wife is the neck that turns the head, that turns the husband to his concern. Both the husband and wife are arms to the family, and both of them are the heart of the family. And the idea actually came from the Chinese jian, which is a bird which is born with one eye, one wing, and one leg. And in order to survive, it has to find its complementary other with the opposite mirror eye, leg, and wing. And in order to fly, they must lean against each other in order to be structurally stable enough to fly. It's like that's where the idea of both of the arms being uh, integrated into the sign come into play. The heart aspect here came from an Irish phrase that I remember, and I'm about to butcher this, by the way. Pa mo kroi istig ionat, which means literally, my heart is within you. So both the husband and the wife should be the heart of the relationship. And then obviously there's Genesis 2:24, the whole complementarian thing. I do have an idea for the second word that came out of this project, actually, was the word for pregnancy, which was a dot in a ring on the pelvis. Excuse me. In the medial pelvic region. Then you had two hearts, and then you had two dots on the brow. So the two hearts are obviously the husband, are the child and the mother. The two dots are the father and the mother, and then obviously the dot over below the navel in the pelvic region would be the child, and then the ring wrapped around it would be the mother enclosing the child. So I gotta work on that one. That might be I gotta work to see if that actually works. But it's the grammar that's been bothering the hell out of me, because the thing I'm having a difficult time with is mostly constraining symbol generation and figuring out a way to generate usable grammar out of this substrate that I've developed. But as of right now, I think that's probably enough schizophrenia for one day. So, it actually took longer than I expected it to. I thought this was going to be a relatively shorter stream, but I still had fun regardless, being able to be completely fucking unhinged with this particular project. So, y'all have a lovely day, and I'm about to go and wash my Oshi. So, y'all take care.